Imagine being trapped for months inside a wooden coffin floating in the middle of the ocean. No land in sight, no fresh food, rats crawling near your bedding, and all you had was the hope that land might appear beyond the foggy horizon. This wasn't fiction. It was daily life aboard ships during the Age of Discovery. Today we're going to dig deep into what it truly meant to live, suffer and survive during those long and brutal sea voyages that shaped our world. If you're into raw, no-fluff historical content, hit that like button, subscribe, and get ready. We're diving into the forgotten decks of maritime history. From the 15th to the 17th century, the world's oceans became highways of conquest, trade, and faith. European powers, Portugal, Spain, France, the Netherlands, and England, launched wave after wave of expeditions chasing gold, spices, land, and glory. But none of it would have been possible without one key ingredient: men. Thousands of them. Poor, desperate, adventurous, or condemned. These men boarded ships that would become their prison, their battlefield, and sometimes their grave. Life aboard was less an adventure and more a test of endurance. A voyage from Lisbon to Brazil could take 3 to 4 months, a trip to India up to 8 months one way, and that's if things went well. One storm could sink everything. A calm sea could mean starvation, disease, mutiny, shipwreck. There were no guarantees. Discipline was militarized. The ship worked like a floating fortress. The captain, appointed by the crown or a trading company, held absolute power. His word was law. He decided who lived, who got punished, and where the ship would go. Below him, the pilot was the mind of navigation, reading the stars, the winds, the tides. Then came the boatswain, enforcing order and labor, and finally the lifeblood of the ship, the sailors. These men adjusted sails, scrubbed decks, climbed masts during storms, and manned the cannons in battle. Teenage cabin boys or deck rats did all the dirty work. Some learned, some died. Carpenters patched holes to keep the sea out. The ship's surgeon, if there was one, used herbs and knives more than medicine, amputating limbs or stitching wounds on a rocking deck. And the chaplain prayed to keep morale from breaking. But even the most devout sailor cried out when the sky turned black and the sea raged, because out there were no gods, only the ocean. And then came the hunger. Weeks without fruit or vegetables meant scurvy. Gums bled, teeth fell out, wounds wouldn't heal. It was a slow, silent death. Food was rock-hard biscuits, sometimes full of maggots. Water turned stale. The air stank of sweat, vomit, and death. And yet, these men endured. Why? Some were promised gold. Others wanted titles or land or redemption, but many had no choice. They were forced, condemned, enslaved, or simply poor. Every voyage was a gamble, every sunrise a small victory. But what did daily life actually look like on one of those ships once they were out at sea? Imagine waking up not to the chirping of birds or the warmth of your bed, but to the creaking of wooden beams above your head and the damp chill of salty wind against your skin. On most ships, there was no such thing as a personal space. Dozens, and sometimes over 100 men were packed into a floating coffin of timber and iron. You slept shoulder to shoulder with strangers, many of them snoring, coughing or moaning from illness or wounds. Privacy simply didn't exist. You did your business over the edge of the ship, bathed in buckets of seawater if you were lucky, and endured a level of grime that would horrify us today. Most days were filled with relentless work. Life aboard was organized into 4-hour shifts or watches, which rotated through the day and night. No matter the weather, no matter your condition, someone always had to be awake and working. Tasks varied: adjusting sails, scrubbing the IO deck, climbing the rigging, loading cargo, repairing leaks, or simply standing watch on the lookout for enemy ships or signs of land. There was rarely a moment of quiet. Orders were shouted constantly, ropes snapped taut under pressure, and the ocean roared just meters away. One wrong step could throw you overboard, lost forever. And then there was the food. Meals were a grim ritual of necessity rather than nourishment. The standard sailor's diet included salted meat, dried legumes, and hard tack, a kind of biscuit so tough you could break your teeth on it. After weeks at sea, these biscuits were often infested with weevils or mold. Drinking water turned foul quickly, stored in wooden barrels that bred bacteria under the heat. To disguise the taste, many sailors mixed their water with alcohol, typically watered-down wine, beer, or a fiery rum. It helped them swallow the rot, but it also dulled their senses and dehydrated them further. Hygiene was almost non-existent. With no fresh water to waste, men rarely washed themselves. Wounds often went untreated, and infections spread like wildfire in the cramped, filthy conditions. Lice, rats, and parasites were part of the crew. Sailors lived with them, sometimes literally eating next to rats, sleeping on worm-infested hammocks and pulling lice from their hair. Diseases like dysentery, typhus, and scurvy weren't just common, they were expected. Scurvy, in particular, was the great terror. Caused by a lack of vitamin C, it led to swollen gums, missing teeth, and eventually death. There were voyages where more men died from illness than from enemy encounters, and yet, despite all of this, discipline had to be maintained. These ships operated like militarized machines. Disobedience or laziness could get you whipped, chained, or even executed. The captain's word was law. A man who challenged authority risked a brutal punishment in front of the entire crew. In this tight, volatile environment, any spark, an argument, a stolen ration, an accusation, could ignite into mutiny. Still, even among the hardship, there was a strange sense of order. Routines and rituals filled the void. Morning prayers, midday meals, evening reports, and occasional celebrations on holy days helped impose a rhythm to the chaos. Men told stories under the stars, sang sea shanties to pass time, and carved trinkets to distract themselves. Some found camaraderie, others found madness, but all of them, no matter their reason for being there, shared the same reality: a fragile wooden world adrift in an unforgiving sea. But what happened when a ship wasn't just sailing but fighting for its life? Because for many aboard these vessels, danger didn't just come from disease or storms, it came from the cannons of an enemy. When warships clashed or pirates struck, the deck of a ship became a floating battlefield. And if you thought life at sea was hard before, battle turned it into hell. The first sign of an approaching threat could send a wave of panic through the crew. A distant flag on the horizon might be friend or foe, but once the cannons were loaded and the sails adjusted for combat, every man knew what was coming. Muskets were passed out. Swords, axes, pikes, anything that could be used to fight hand to hand, were distributed. Powder boys, often just children, scrambled to deliver gunpowder from the magazine deep below deck to the waiting cannons, their tiny feet flying across blood-slick planks. And then it began. The roar of cannon fire wasn't like anything a man had heard before. It didn't just deafen you, it shook your bones. The air filled with smoke so thick you could barely see your hands. Splinters the size of knives flew through the air as cannonballs shattered timber and iron. Limbs were torn off. Men were crushed, burned, impaled. The surgeon's quarters became a nightmare of screams and blood as he worked with crude tools, usually fair saw and a bottle of rum. There were no safe places on the ship during battle. The upper deck was exposed to musket fire, but the lower decks were often worse. Imagine being in total darkness as cannonballs punched through the hull, water gushed in, and blood dripped from the beams above. Men fought not just to win, but to survive. If the enemy boarded, it was down to blades and fists, desperate, savage fighting with no quarter given. You might be fighting alongside someone who'd been your enemy last year, or against a man who looked just like you. And if your ship lost, if the flag fell and the captain surrendered, that didn't always mean survival. You could be taken prisoner, thrown in chains, or forced to serve your enemies. Others were simply killed on the spot. Some desperate crews scuttled their own ships, rather than let them fall into enemy hands. And many went down with their vessel, lost forever in the deep. But even victory wasn't always sweet. A ship could be so damaged it couldn't make it back to port. Supplies could be lost, or disease could take hold among the wounded. The sea never gave easy answers, and those who survived battle bore the scars, not just on their bodies, but in their minds. The trauma of seeing friends blown apart beside them, the smell of blood and gunpowder, the unrelenting noise. These things stayed with a man long after he set foot on land again. This is the part of history we often don't see. Not the glory in paintings or the heroic music in films, but the real raw truth of what it meant to live and die aboard a ship in those brutal centuries. Every splintered beam and shattered sail carries the story of men who endured unimaginable hardship, not for riches or fame, but simply to survive. If this glimpse into the forgotten lives of sailors struck a chord with you, help us bring more untold stories to light. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who thinks history is just about dates and